All right. Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar for Atlas Carbon and Maya grazing. The topic for today is decoding the impact of dry times. My name is Ashley Silver. I'm the CEO of Atlas Carbon, and today we're going to touch upon a few different things. One is how soil carbon reacts in dry conditions and explore the science behind dry times, bushfires, and soil carbon dynamics. We're then going to talk a bit about how this can be managed while participating in a soil carbon project and what day-to-day practices can increase soil carbon performance regardless of the weather. I'm happy to have our three guests joining us today, first of which is Dr. Elaine Mitchell, who's a research fellow in the Managing for Resilient Landscapes theme at the Institute of Future Environments at QUT. You all, if you've joined before, you've seen Dr. Elaine Mitchell on some of our previous webinars, but to remind everyone, her research focuses on soil carbon, with a particular interest in the mechanisms and drivers of the formation and persistence of soil organic carbon. Dr. Elaine Mitchell is also an advisor to Atlas Carbon and has supported us across many of these facets. We also have Sean Hubin, who's Atlas Carbon's Carbon Services Director. Sean brings to us decades of experience across carbon project management and natural resource management with roles across the impact and government sector. And last but not least, we have Rach Ritchie, who is a resilient grazing practitioner on his own property in New South Wales, a Maya grazing customer, and an Atlas Carbon blueprint consultant who works alongside Bart Davidson on our team. They work together to develop bespoke property plans called blueprints and to support the successful transition of properties wanting to adopt more resilient grazing practices to successfully build and maintain soil carbon. Okay, so we're going to get into it. We're going to do a quick round robin about the different perspectives on soil carbon in dry times with each of our guests, and then we'll move to the audience for questions. So Elaine, we'll start with you. So we know that you're going to share with us a little bit about what we know around what happens to soil carbon during and after drought, and really what the existing data and research is showing us. I know you've prepared just a few materials for that, and so we'll bring those up, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Ashley. So yes, just a few materials to go through, but usual story is we don't have huge amounts of data, but the data we do have tells a picture that hopefully I'll run through now. So there is good news and there's bad news. I'll start with the bad news. The bad news, of course, during drier conditions, there will be a decrease in soil organic carbon stocks. So the data that we do have, there's been sort of meta-analyses done where scientists take all the studies that have been done on drought, and across all those studies, then there's seen about a 10% decrease in soil organic carbon stocks during dry times. Now, the data that you're looking at on the slide here is from a site in southwest Queensland, again showing us a decline in soil organic carbon stocks between 2014, shown by the grey bars, and 2020, shown by the blue bars. So we've got in a clay, loam, and a sandy soil. So actually, the greatest decline we saw in the clay soil. So this is likely due to the higher carbon content in these higher clay soils and higher microbial population. So when the rains do return, we get this huge flush of microbial activity. I like to imagine it like you see on the right-hand side of the slide there. The microbial community kicks back into action. You get this huge pulse of CO2 upon re-wetting of the soil. So I think this is actually a common misconception about droughts, is that most of the carbon isn't actually lost during the drought. It's when we get these re-wetting events, the rains return at the end of the drought, that we get the microbial population kicking back into action. So soil microbial communities, they've developed tolerance to stress much more than, say, plants and animals. So they kind of go into this dormancy during water stress, and they've evolved this ability to be able to retain water within their cells. So even when there's very, very little water in the soil around them. So during this dormant state, there's a real reduction in metabolic activity. And they're acting to conserve energy and be able to bounce back into action then when favorable conditions return. So when the rains return, then you get this flush of microbial activity. And at the same time, in the picture on the right there, you haven't got much in the way of photosynthesis happening. So you're getting this real loss of carbon overall. So averaged across these soil types, then we saw about a 30% decline in soil organic carbon stocks. So that being the bad news, the good news is that, next slide, Ashley. Sorry again, yeah. So the good news is that, and also if you play the clip. So whilst I'm talking here, if you just actually have a look at the top right there, it's conveniently being pointed out by a tie wrap on the tower there, but it's just a tussock that's recovering from drought, and you can see that importance of retaining the ground cover so that tussock is able to bounce back the most quickly when the rains return. So the good news being that when the drought breaks, so this is again, it was only measured under the clay soil on the left-hand side, which you see with the orange bar, but there was a recovery to almost 2014 levels with the return of better conditions. So soil organic carbon levels do recover in relatively quickly. Next slide, please. So busy slide here, but I'm hopefully going to be able to illustrate then the importance of grazing management in retaining ground cover and responding to drought. So the bottom, the blue line there is showing us 12-month rolling rainfall. We then have estimates of above ground biomass. So it's shown for two different treatments. We have our conventional grazing shown by the grey dotted line, and then a farm that was being managed under time control grazing, so high density, frequent rotations of the cattle plus pasture renovation that primarily involved the inclusion of legumes within the pasture. The black dotted line is showing us when the time control grazing was implemented. So that was back in about 2010. And I should mention that the biomass is estimated from satellites, that's using vegetation indices like NDVI. And you can see then that the response of the difference in response essentially between the control and the time control grazing. So the green line then showing a slower decline into the drought. So the bottom of that peak, Ashley, actually you just can point that out where it dips. Yeah, just there. So that's our 2019 drought. It would be very helpful if I'd remember to put dates on the x-axis. However, you can see then that we have this decline in above ground biomass into the 2019 drought. But you see it's a slower decline under the time control grazing, and then you see a faster response out of the drought under the time control grazing. Again, towards the end of that, where we have the limit of the data, it's showing that once we're now returning into drier conditions, you can see that it's a slower decline than under the conventional grazing as well. So hopefully an illustration that although most of that variation over time in above ground biomass, and therefore we can assume in soil organic carbon stocks has been driven by rainfall, there is a management signal in there. If we maintain ground cover through better grazing management, then we get this quicker response essentially out of a drought. Now, the final slide, Ashley, is just a quick note I'd like to say on the type of ground cover. So we're not just interested in the amount of ground cover, we're interested in what exactly is there. So this is showing us some data we have from QUT showing us the net drawdown of carbon into plants and soil. This is measured by these eddy covariance flux towers. These are essentially just like fancy weather stations. One of the things they measure is carbon balance in the landscape. So that's the balance between what's being drawn in through photosynthesis versus what's being respired by the microbes in the soil. So anything below the zero line is good. That means we're getting carbon drawn into the landscape. And you can see there's a real difference then between what was our control under the buffel grass monoculture versus, we have a mixed species plus legumes. We're getting this greater carbon drawdown over time. So, you know, we're looking at a period of about 2 years. You can see the difference in the treatments. I'm putting myself on the spot here, trying to do my maths in my head, but about 2.5 tons over 2 years. About 10% of that is likely to be converted into soil organic carbon. So you're looking at about, you know, 1/4 of a ton difference between the two treatments. So yes, the type of ground, the ground cover and also the type of ground cover is very important to making your systems more resilient and storing more soil carbon. Thank you, Ashley. That's me done.
Excellent, Elaine. That was a really nice summary, and I think really informative just around when soil carbon could be lost and how it can bounce back with better grazing management, ground cover, and even the sources of ground cover. I'm sure we'll have, if people have additional questions for Elaine, please put them into the chat and we'll get to them in a few minutes. Now, so we know we can lose soil carbon during drought, but build it back up over time. Now, are there implications for this when we're doing a soil carbon project under the Australian method, and what are some key considerations people should have in mind for that? So Sean Hubin, I'm going to pass over to you. And if you can share your perspective on some of these considerations, soil carbon project registration, offset reporting, and what happens if a region is hit with drought close to any of these key reporting periods.
Great, thanks, Ashley. So yeah, Elaine's given a good overview of the science. I suppose, you know, fundamentally it's drought, it can be fire, it can be flood. All these things can impact soil carbon levels. And, you know, in the sort of carbon world, they're referred to as reversal events. But yeah, good management can minimize losses and help rebuild soil carbon levels. Another important factor to remember is there's plenty of time to recover from a reversal event. For a project that's 25 years, you know, you can have these short-term impacts, but there is plenty of time to build back to where you were and beyond. So yeah, with the right preparation and the right management practices over a 25-year period, the trend will be upwards. But there are some key method requirements to be aware of when you're doing a project. So I'll run through some of these. You know, timing is obviously a fairly important factor. The timing of a reversal event and soil carbon measurement is important to look at. Soil resampling, you do your baseline first, then you do your resampling for offset reports. And these must occur at least every 5 years, but they can be sooner. So, you know, obviously, if a major event happens just prior to 5 years at the required sampling point, could impact on soil carbon levels and the amount of carbon credits generated. There's a number of ways to deal with this. You know, one option is obviously to sample earlier. So you can sample at 3, you can sample, you know, much earlier, but you've got to give your property some time to build up soil carbon. But yeah, being aware of what's going on and deciding to sample earlier is one clear way you can kind of manage this risk. The method also allows for the project start date to be moved by about 18 months. This has to happen prior to the first offset report. So once you move your start date, it means that that 5-year deadline for your first resampling, your first offset report can be shifted as well. So basically, you know, you can respond to what's happening and you can look at the timing of your sampling and offset reports. Baseline soil sampling obviously is you know, the critical one to start with. The baseline soil sampling happens at the beginning of a project, and all subsequent sampling and offset reports are based on this. And clearly you don't want to be baselining and then have a potential reversal event afterwards. You know, that said, again though, there's still, you know, another 5 years to build back up. So, you know, if it does happen, you know, there's ways to respond to that. And also your baseline soil sampling timing does have flexibility. There's the option to undertake it even prior to registration being completed. You can submit your registration and move to doing baseline soil sampling. And then post-registration, once the regulator has approved the project, you can choose when you go to baseline soil sampling. But the obvious thing is you don't want to leave it too long, especially if you're putting in practices to build soil carbon. You want to sort of get it generally at the start. Yeah, so what you can vary baseline soil sampling, but obviously accurately predicting weather and natural disasters is not really possible. A successful project in the end will be based on doing the initial analysis of your property's carbon potential and then implementing and maintaining the recommended practices over 25 years. And this is the sort of information that Atlas Carbon's cost benefit report and blueprint program provide to graziers. Information and recommendations to implement in your land management strategy over 25 years that are going to lead to soil carbon increasing over the project period, as well as helping with land condition and grazing productivity. So reversal events do happen, so I suppose you need to also be aware about how you respond to a reversal event. So if you have a soil sampling and an offset report that does show a decrease in soil carbon, there are, again, ways to respond to this. If it's going to be the first before the first offset report, there have been no ACCUs issued and therefore no ACCUs to be relinquished. For subsequent offset reports, there are a number of mechanisms built in. Yeah, there's lots of detail here, but there's a few key things. So for the first offset report, the regulator sort of takes an extra 25% of ACCUs that have been generated, and these are banked. So at your second offset report, if there is an increase in soil carbon, these are released back to you. So it minimizes the risk of having to pay back ACCUs at the second soil or the second offset report period. Yeah, and if there is a reversal event, generally speaking, projects and landholders are given the chance to respond to that, to take the actions to build back soil carbon. Ultimately, the regulator can require you to return ACCUs, or they can put in place something called a carbon maintenance declaration. But as they say on their website, this is a compliance measure of last resort. Generally, the first step is to allow soil carbon to be built back up. Another sort of facet to be aware of is that the person or organisation who is the proponent of the project is responsible for any ACCU return to a reversal. They basically take on the risk of a reversal event. The Atlas Carbon model is that, or a preferred approach is that we go in as co-proponents with the landholder. So, we both are motivated to make the project work and also both bear the risk of a reversal event happening. So, these are some of the kind of points of detail you need to know about reversal events. Obviously, the first step is to understand the potential of your property to build soil carbon and generate credits over 25 years. And, the key factor here is implementing the grazing practices that will build soil carbon. After this, you can definitely look at the timing of baseline soil sampling and offset soil sampling. And, these are things that can be considered. So you, I suppose, have the blueprint, Atlas blueprint in place, you get ready to register, and then you have the sort of time and space and information to discuss with us, when is the best time for your baseline soil sampling, and then obviously after that, when you want to go to offset soil sampling. Thanks, Ashley.
Great, thanks, Sean. So what I'm taking from that summary is, these projects are long-term commitments, and the regulator has designed the method and the policies to respond to the reality that there may be ups and downs based on weather, and there is a level of flexibility around the timing for things such as your baselining and your subsequent offset reports. There are options to go back to the regulator during hard times and talk about implementing some of those timing shifts. And the regulator really tries to work with its projects to ensure that long-term improvement in soil carbon is really the focus. So really, they understand there could be short-term hiccups, but it's really about that long-term commitment to practice adoption and improvement in the landscape. So on that topic, let's go over to Rafe. So Rafe has been out really across New South Wales and Queensland looking at some of the properties we're working with in our blueprint program, and really thinking about what are those practices and things that need to happen on farm to make sure that soil carbon is being built and maintained and protected as we start hitting these dry times. So Rafe, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you've seen and what kind of recommendations you're all often making in these blueprint programs?
Yeah, thanks, Ashley, and it's been fascinating listening to our other two guests. Yeah, we're seeing, the typical thing in dry times where it's sort of an insidious creep. We start off 12, 18 months ago with more feed than we could do anything with, and then farmers are farming and they're catching up, and they're playing a high paced game, and then it sort of stops raining and there's still plenty of feed, and then before they wake up one day and they've got real feed gaps. But then so many of these farmers now are so good at feeding cattle. They've got really good at production feeding that the cattle aren't slipping. So their pastures are getting really overgrazed, but they're supplementing them at a very high cost, and then the pastures are going down. So what we see a lot of recently is some really expensive pastures being grazed past a recovery point, and effectively a lot of people now are burning up money now. They're trading good times now for more money down the road. So a lot of these pastures are getting grazed to the point where they'll have to be resown when it starts to rain again, and that's a big bill down the road, and then obviously a lot of bare soil between now and then. So most dry times end with big rain, and that usually means a lot of erosion on bare soil. So what they're effectively doing is borrowing some happiness from the future, and that's so when it rains and it's supposed to be good and the cattle are worth more, then they're going to be big bills around resowing pastures, around fixing up a lot of erosion, and with big expensive machines. So I think that there's been a really clear indication, not clear indication, but a clear trend where people probably aren't quite budgeting their feed and actually how much they're consuming. I think that's a really important thing. So they're feeding cattle in paddocks on half rations or a third ration, and eking the last bit out of the pasture, and all they're really doing there is degrading that pasture. So when it does rain, it's a weaker, less tolerant pasture, and then also it's just exposed ground, which Elaine clearly said is going to really cause problems around degrading soil carbon numbers. So the common recommendations, that keeps going back more and more is you've got to look at the recovery and what that pasture needs, and you can't be grazing the pasture down if there's nothing left. And I know it's a very easy thing for me to say on a webinar, when we're all in the middle of a fight now. That's the problem with most of these routes is you wake up one day and you've been in a battle for 6 months, and you got there with no intention of getting that way. And I think that the data is a big issue there. Some of the Myer grazing data was showing us quite clearly a little while ago that we had to, cut the stocking back and contain, if we are going to feed cattle, get them out of the paddocks and don't rob Peter to pay Paul. And I think that's so a lot of times people are probably getting in and focusing on their livestock. They've got good data around that. They weigh them all the time, and they need to keep that average daily gain up or that reproduction rate or whatever. But when it comes to their pasture and their grass, that data is what's lacking in. And I think that's they're like I said, they're robbing Peter to pay Paul. And if we look down the road and couple that into carbon, they're degrading their pasture, they're degrading the carbon stocks in the soil. So that means they're going to be resowing into soil that is less resilient, less water holding capability, and less able to handle big rain events. And so they're pushing down the road a problem that should be one problem, which should be we need more rain to grow more grass. And now they're going to push down to the road, we need to resow pastures, we need to control weeds, we need to retain water in soil that doesn't really want to retain it. So yeah, the back to recommendations. A lot of the time, it is, you know, getting control of that rest period, of that recovery period, and you know, really focusing on what those pastures need to get back to, also to be kept in a healthy state, and not grazing them down to a level that they will take forever to recover from. And that's a pretty common one. And then, you know, soil wise, we see a lot of good soils with maybe one or two constraints that need, you know, that will need a bit of additive, but generally it's that we're seeing that pasture as just being just grazed past the point of what I call easy recovery. You know, we're going from 60, 90, 80 day recoveries to grazing a plant that will need 150 to 180 days. And you know, in real terms, that's 6 months. So that's a long time that you need to be out of that paddock for, because it's been grazed so much. So those are sort of some of the trends. The other trends is we're still seeing a bit of moisture at depth. So that's really positive that, you know, that there is, due to the, you know, the good years we've had, there is still some real possibility of deep-rooted plants still doing very well. So I think that probably is as close as I can get to a general wrap-up for a 3,000K span on what we do.
Thanks so much, Rafe. I really like the importance that you put on kind of blending the balance between caring for grass and pasture alongside livestock and the grazing businesses that our customers are running. We know that with the current dry times, though many are now getting a bit of rain, which we're really excited to see, alongside what the cattle market has been doing the past 6 months. It's been really tough to try to make those balances. And that's why we really try to work on a personalized level with each of our customers, because we know these decisions are tough. It's about looking at your data, what's going on your property, and trying to optimize the decisions across all of those different things. We have time for a couple questions. I'll move into really quickly. So one, Elaine, this one is more geared towards you. So I think previously many soil carbon projects were sampling just at 30 centimeters. I think more and more the industry average is getting to a meter at depth for soil carbon projects. What do we know about what happens during drought at depths between 30 and 100 centimeters, Elaine?
Yeah, unfortunately the data isn't great, which is not the response you want to hear, but that is the situation. But having said that, the expectation is that the losses at depth would be much less than what we see at 0 to 30, primarily because there's less microbial activity at depth. So you don't remember I was talking about this kind of pulse of activity we get upon re-wetting. And also carbon at depth tends to be in a more stable form. So we get much more, because there's more mineral surfaces available, we get more what we call mineral associated organic carbon, where the carbon is bound to mineral surfaces and therefore less accessible to any microbes that may be there. So yes, in general, the expectation would be much less loss at depth in comparison to 0 to 30.
Thanks so
and
much.
That's why I think it's, you know, getting carbon in at depth is, you know, being seen as a really good strategy for creating resilient carbon stocks, particularly during, you know, disturbance events like droughts.
Wonderful. And then Sean, I think people are asking for clarification on that 25% withholding of carbon credits in that first offset report. Can you just explain that one more time for the audience?
Yeah, so there's a whole lot of different percentages the regulator does take out of the project. So when you go from a 100-year project to a 25-year project, there is 20% taken off the ACCUs generated to account for the permanence period being smaller. There is also a 5% risk of reversal buffer, which is taken off. So that's like the sort of standard 25% that's taken off for a soil carbon project. But additional to that, there is another 25%, which is taken at the first offset report. But that one actually comes back to you. whereas the others don't. So basically it's kind of banked with the regulator. When you get to your second offset report and the soil carbon is going up, it comes back to you. So basically that is just sort of putting it aside as a sort of risk management measure. So if there is any sort of reversal, I suppose there's a benefit to the landholder that they won't be up for having to sort of relinquish ACCUs. It used to be 50%, so they brought it down from 50% to 25%, but it's over and above the other ones.
Thank you, Sean. We are now at time for today's webinar. I just want to thank Elaine, Sean, and Rafe again for joining us and for all those participants who listened in. If you want to learn more about Atlas Carbon, there will be a QR code that comes up at the end of this call. Also, you can visit us at atlascarbon.ag and our sister company, Maya Grazing, as well. We wish you all the best, and we look forward to seeing you next month for our series. Also, if people have recommendations on other topics you'd like to hear discussed, please shoot us an email and we'll make it happen. Thanks, everyone.